В розмові з міністром імміграції Джейсон Кенні зараз почуємо про нові канадські супервізи для іммігрантів, які вже мають родину в Канаді.
Mr. Minister, on June 28th, you pressed the reset button in relation to immigration issues in Canada, whereby on one hand, you got rid of the backlog of immigration applications, and on the other hand, put on hold some of the new ones. Could you explain that for us, please?
So over the years, we ended up with a huge uncontrollable backlog in our immigration system. It was largely because the previous government had imposed an obligation to process every immigration application we received with no limit on the number of applications. Now, obviously, because Canada is the best country in the world, we have way more people who want to immigrate here than we can practically admit in a given year. But that's a good problem to have. But it meant that year after year, we were taking in over, say 400,000 to 500,000 applications from people around the world with their application fees. But Canada had decided year after year to admit about, half as many people, about 250,000. And the very simple problem is this: we were allowing all of those surplus applications to back up in our system. The metaphor is this: let's say the plane to Canada has 250,000 seats. Well, we were selling 500,000 tickets for it. And that meant year after year, you ended up with a backlog totaling 1 million people waiting in our various programs for 7 or 8 years on a decision. And we kept doing the same thing, reminding me of one definition of insanity, repeating the same thing, expecting a different result. Well, the problem was just getting worse and worse. And the system was getting so slow moving that many of the brightest people around the world who would make ideal immigrants weren't prepared to get in the back of a 7 or 8 year long queue when they could maybe immigrate to Australia or New Zealand in a few months. So we needed to take decisive action to stop the backlog, stop the madness, and get back to a well-run, practical system, one that can work quickly, one where we can admit those immigrants that we need and desire in a matter of months rather than several years. And that's why we've brought in these measures, our action plan for faster immigration, which has culminated in legislation that we adopted last month, allowing us to return about 3/4 of the old applications left in our skilled worker program. Bottom line is, this will allow us, that together with a temporary pause on new applications, will allow us to bring in the remaining people who are sitting in that backlog, about 100,000 and 110,000 of them, and then next year, by the end of 2013, here's the exciting thing: we will have a fast, just-in-time immigration system. And what this means is, when we fix this problem, you'll apply and your application will be considered within a matter of months. And this will allow, Jurij, this is the exciting part of this will allow employers in Canada who need workers given our labor shortages, to go abroad and proactively recruit people who they are confident can work at their skill level upon arrival in Canada, and bring those folks in a matter of months. That's the new system, a system that will be much more responsive to the needs of our labor market, much faster moving, and will therefore lead to more immigrants arriving with pre-arranged jobs, meaning that they will have higher incomes, will be able to reduce unemployment amongst immigrants, and fill many of the labor shortages in our economy. This is the big vision: an immigration system that works for Canada, works for Canada's economy, and works for newcomers, so we are no longer ending up with large numbers of immigrants in unemployment, underemployment, or in survival jobs. Bottom line is, I want immigrants to come and succeed as quickly as possible, and a fast system that connects prospective immigrants with employers to fill job shortages in Canada is the kind of system we need. We can't do that if we're sitting on an 8 year long queue.
Honourable Minister, this portfolio is a very difficult one, not just in relation to the actual immigrants that are coming to Canada, but all the peripheral activity that happens around these applications. And I know that you're specifically interested about unethical activities surrounding that, by false representations and so forth. Right now, the Ukrainian community is preparing for the elections in Ukraine, for the election observer mission. And I just heard directly that the process of applying for immigration to Canada in Kyiv has changed, whereby now you submit all your documents in an envelope to a security guard who tells you then that the response will come in approximately 2 or 3 weeks. Whereas before, you were able to get a receipt and you were able to get an answer, if it's positive, at least within 2 or 3 hours. So this indeed actually attracts unethical behavior, because people would need middle people to take care of their applications, to not be caught in that situation where you submit your documents and do not have a receipt. Are you aware of this issue? And if yes, how are you going to be able to straighten that out?
So, I haven't heard anything about any changes in the administration of our visa office in Kyiv. I'll look into this. I do know that I think in 2007 we increased the number of people working at Immigration Canada's office at the Kyiv embassy by about 3 people. And I do know there's been a slight increase in the number of permanent resident immigrants coming from Ukraine to Canada. I think the number of visitors has been relatively constant. And the good news is that the acceptance rate for visitor visas out of Ukraine has gone up somewhat, and it's been, I think, bouncing around 88 or 90%, which is good news. But this is the first I've heard of any new administrative process there, and I certainly will look into it.
In your reset button situation here with new applications, they are mostly focused on specialized or skilled workers, as well as the investor class. But it seems to me that the issue of family reunification may have fallen in between the cracks, or at least it seems like that to the outside viewer.
Well, I don't think it's fallen between the cracks, because it's still a very important part of our overall immigration system. In fact, the vast majority of people who immigrate to Canada are actually family members, not primary economic immigrants. So, about 2/3 of the people who enter Canada on an annual basis are the spouses, children, parents, or grandparents of the primary of someone in Canada. And just in the program for sponsorship of children, spouses, parents, and grandparents from abroad, we admit about 65,000 of those people a year. In terms of the parental sponsorship program in particular, we've been, the government of Canada over the past roughly 3 decades has maintained the most generous program in the developed world with respect to parental sponsorship. Most other developed countries don't let elderly people migrate, except on very limited basis, or very limited circumstances. So here's the problem with that program, is that, like our immigration system in general, we ended up getting far more applications each year than there were positions available. So on an annual basis, we were getting 40,000 to 50,000 applications for parental sponsorship, when there were about, in our immigration plan, about 17,000 positions available. Now, let me just say this, maybe this is a bit controversial, but I think there's a practical limit to how many parents and grandparents, elderly people, we can immigrate to Canada on an annual basis, because we estimate on average that an immigrant coming in at the age of 65 represents at least a $10,000 annual cost to the public health system, and about $160,000 in lifetime costs to the health system. These are people who typically are not in the tax-paying workforce, and we defend the idea of high immigration levels in Canada on the basis that we're trying to deal with the aging of the population, and we need younger people to deal with the shrinkage of the labor force. So if we were to massively expand the number of parents that we admit so that it corresponds with the number of applications that we get, that is to say, to go from 15 to 50,000 parents and grandparents, the costs of that would be enormous. And we're already stressed in our healthcare system. So my point is that I think we need to be generous, but also practical about the number of elderly folks that can get permanent residency in Canada on an annual basis. So here's how we're trying to solve the problem. Because of the long backlogs, we ended up with 180,000 people waiting in the parents' program for sponsorship, taking 7 to 8 years to process their applications. It became completely out of control. Had we done nothing to change this, the wait times the backlog would have kept growing and growing. The wait times would have gone from 8 years to 15 years, and we project by the end of this decade to a 20-year wait time to process parental sponsorship applications. So clearly the system was broken. So we tried to fix it through something called the Action Plan for Faster Family Reunification. 4 points in that plan. 1, a 2-year temporary pause on new applications so we can catch up and start processing the backlog. Secondly, we've increased by 60% the number of parents that we will admit to Canada. We've gone from about 15,000 to about 25,000 parents and grandparents that we will admit this year and next year. So when people say, have you forgotten about or shut down family reunification, or has it fallen between the cracks? No, actually, we've significantly increased the number of parents coming to the country. Those two actions, a pause on new applications, an increase in the number of parents coming in, mean that at the beginning of 2014, when we reopen that program for new applications on the basis of new criteria, that the backlog will have been cut in half, as will the processing time. So new applications will be processed in 3 years rather than 7 years. That's good news. The third point in the plan is the new parental super visa. This allows for visiting parents to get a 10-year multiple entry visa with an authorized stay of up to 2 years, as long as they get private health insurance, to make sure that if they get sick in Canada, the family is caring for them, is taking responsibility and not pushing those costs onto the Canadian taxpayer. This is, I think, the big solution, because a lot of these elderly relatives, frankly, they're well settled in their countries. They have other family and all of their friends there. They don't necessarily want to move permanently to Canada, live through the Canadian winter. They don't necessarily want to be babysitters 7 days a week in their 70s and 80s. And so this new super visa allows them to come for extended visits when the grandkids are getting married or being born. They can stay for 2 years at a time. They can come and go over a decade, no hassle. That, I think, is a big solution. The final thing is that we are consulting with people on how to redesign this program in the future. So when we open it up for new applications on a permanent basis in 2014, the number of applications that we get will correspond with the number of people that we admit, so there's no backlog. So eventually people would be admitted within a year of their application. And here's the good news. It's being processed in about 7 weeks around the world. So you could either get in the queue for 7 years for permanent residency sponsorship of your parents, or get a super visa for their extended visits in 7 weeks. I think that makes a lot of sense for a lot of families.
Продовжуємо інтерв'ю з міністром імміграції Джейсон Кенні. Тут розмова повертається на тему зовнішньої політики Канади відносно проблем з демократією в Україні та ширших глобальних проблем з Росією.
Mr. Minister, would you please kindly comment a little bit about Canada's position in relation to the deterioration of democracy in Ukraine?
So, as you know, our government is deeply concerned about the growing reports of human rights violations, political trials in Ukraine, the ongoing imprisonment and the deteriorating health condition of Yulia Tymoshenko. We have repeatedly and vigorously raised our objections with the President and the government of Ukraine. John Baird, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, has offered to send Canadian physicians to Ukraine to monitor the health status of some of these political people who are behind bars, and we'll be making an announcement about that shortly. Canada will also be sending probably the world's largest election observer mission to the upcoming elections in Ukraine. As you know, the Prime Minister had a hugely successful visit to Ukraine last year, which on the one hand continued to promote trade and engagement with Ukraine, including through our preliminary free trade negotiations, but at the same time also clearly emphasized our belief in the need for modern Ukraine to embrace universal standards of human rights and the rule of law and democracy. The Prime Minister himself underscored that with his visit to the Terror Museum in Lviv and his visit with the Ukrainian Catholic Patriarch, his speech at the Catholic University, and These are all indications of how Canada, I think, is playing a major role in Ukraine. So we continue to be engaged, and we look for an ongoing partnership with the Ukrainian community in Canada in this respect.
In terms of the abuse of the immigration system or the refugee system that is very prevalent here in Canada, we have the situation of Mr., to get it right, Len Akov, an ex-KGB agent who is residing in a Lutheran church in Vancouver now for over 3 years. Could you tell us what the future is of, what the future resolution of this issue may be?
Well, Yuri, normally I'm in a difficult position. I can't talk about usually individual cases because of the Privacy Act. Having said that, I think pretty much all of the details of Mr. Len Akov's case are in the public domain because he's gone to the court. They're all in the court records, and it's all been discussed in the media. So I don't think I'm revealing any secret to say that Mr. Len Akov had the benefit of our fair and generous legal system at several steps. I think he's taken 7 or 8 years dealing with his inadmissibility to Canada. Let me explain that under our immigration law, Section 34 and 35 of the Refugee Protection Act, if you are or have been a member of an organization involved in espionage against Canada or other allies, or an organization involved in crimes against humanity, war crimes, or other kinds of human rights violations, then you are inadmissible to Canada. And when you come into the country, there's an expectation that if you did belong to such an organization, you disclose it. On our visa forms, we ask some of these questions. It's clear from the legal record that Mr. Len Akov did not disclose, when he came to Canada as a student, his former membership in the KGB. The historical record is clear. Not only was the KGB an espionage organization, membership in which renders one inadmissible to Canada, but the KGB was also an organization responsible for many of the worst crimes in modern history. An organization that was the pointy tip of the spear of oppression and crimes against the people of the Soviet republics, and which was responsible for many crimes committed in other parts of the world outside, beyond the Iron Curtain. Anyone who was a member of the KGB knew what they were getting into. And yes, it's true that maybe some people were pressured into joining that organization, but it's also true that maybe some people were pressured into committing crimes during the Nazi regime. Following orders is not an excuse, joining an organization that's involved in espionage against Canada and the perpetration of crimes against humanity. And that is essentially the legal grounds upon which an individual like Mr. Len Akov is inadmissible to Canada. Now, our system is very fair and generous, which is why someone like him has had multiple steps to consider at the Immigration and Refugee Board, at the federal court, in our legal system, multiple appeals, and all the way up to seeking an application to stay his removal, I think 3 years ago. Every step of the way, his applications were rejected by our fair and generous legal system. And so this individual has no right to be in Canada. He is here illegally. He is inadmissible. He must leave. And the enforcement of those deportation orders are a responsibility of the Canada Border Services Agency, which is like a police agency. It's a law enforcement agency. I, as a elected official, as a politician, cannot interfere in the direct operational decisions of a law enforcement agency. We trust organizations like the CBSA and the RCMP to do their job and to remove people that are inadmissible from Canada. I can't really comment much beyond that. I think we know the circumstances of where this individual is living. And I have to trust that the CBSA will do their job in the fullness of time.
We are sure that the worldwide Ukrainian community is pleased with Canada's stance on the international scene in relation to the issues of lack of democracy in Ukraine. But one of the underlying issues is Russia itself. President Yanukovych, to a great degree, is copying exactly what Mr. Putin is doing in Russia. There are serious unsavory incursions by Russia into Ukraine's independent territory. We have the worldwide global problem of Russia today supporting the undemocratic regime in Syria. We also have the potential of Russia interfering with Canada's interests in the Arctic. And we are discussing the concept of lack of democracy in Ukraine in Canada's parliament in relation to Ukraine, but we're not discussing the lack of democracy in Russia in Canada's parliament. And I'm wondering if Canada is aware of these worldwide problems that will relate to having serious issues on the international stage in relation to Canada's territorial claims in the Arctic.
Well, Jurij, actually our government's been criticized for being too strong in asserting our sovereignty vis-a-vis the Russian Federation. And I think we've taken a responsible approach in saying that we defend the sovereignty of our Arctic territory. We are displeased by Russian military incursions over Canadian airspace and into Canadian waters. We are placing a huge emphasis on protecting practically, in a practical way, our Arctic sovereignty because of the some of these issues. And we've also been very clear about our hope and expectation that the Russian people will enjoy the same kind of open, transparent, accountable, democratic rights that we enjoy. We believe these are universal rights, and so I think we've been quite strong about these issues. We've been strong in supporting the sovereignty and independence of the former East Bloc countries. The Prime Minister, Harper, has been a world leader in condemning the dictatorial and undemocratic nature of the government in Belarus, for example. And so we will continue to assert a policy that is based on, yes, Canada's interests, including the protection of our sovereignty, and also our democratic values. And we think that Ukraine is a very important theater for those issues because, in part, frankly, of the large Ukrainian diaspora in Canada with the strong human bridge. This isn't about, by the way, I want to respond to some of the commentators who say this is about domestic Canadian politics. No, this is about Canada. And the reality is Canada has in part been built by the contribution of Ukrainian immigrants and their descendants. And this creates a uniquely strong human bridge and Canadian interest in Ukraine. We shouldn't be shy about asserting that. And that really, I think, is what's helped to inform our policy in favor of a free, independent, and democratic Ukraine, and indeed the broader region.